What's up everyone, Mark here and welcome to another episode of Down the Road. Today we're going to be talking about Rhode Island's largest body of fresh water, which is also a man-made body of water and the source of more than 60% of the state's drinking water. We're talking, of course, about the Scituate Reservoir. You know, the old saying goes, you don't get something for nothing, and that certainly couldn't be truer here. The reservoir system and its waterworks are a magnificent treasure, beautifully marrying the work of Mother Nature with human engineering. But in Scituate's case, it came at a heartbreakingly staggering cost measured in lives and livelihoods. Back at the turn of the 20th century, Providence and its surrounding metropolitan area were growing by leaps and bounds. And as has always been the case, when a population increases, so too does the need for clean, safe drinking water. Prior water sources in Cranston were predicted to fall short of demand in only a few years, as Providence's water supply system was strained to serve greater and greater populations in surrounding communities. Scituate, Rhode Island was first settled in the early 1700s by immigrants from Scituate, Massachusetts. Fittingly, and almost as a premonition of its fate as a future source of drinking water, Scituate, or Scituate, was named for a Native American word which loosely translates to cold brook or cold river. Over the intervening 2 centuries, Scituate grew into a bustling community of mill villages with a population of nearly 3,500 by the 1910 census. In 1913, the city of Providence formed a water supply board, a new city department tasked with locating a suitable source of drinking water for the city. They were successful and began eyeing a location at the confluence of the North Branch Patuxent River and its tributaries in Scituate. Then, in 1915, the Rhode Island General Assembly enacted legislation which gave the Providence Water Supply Board the power to acquire the land needed for the reservoir through eminent domain, a concept foreign to many at the time, and certainly so for the poorer and less connected residents of rural Scituate. In the United States at least, eminent domain provisions generally allow for the compulsory acquisition of land by governments and municipalities in the name of the public good. In Scituate's case, the Water Supply Board was given the authority to condemn and compel the purchase of 14,800 acres, or just over 23 square miles of land for the reservoir and its surrounding watershed. This was significant because the land was far from unoccupied. Scituate's total land area is only around 35,000 acres, or 55 square miles to begin with. The land needed for the reservoir system would swallow up nearly half the town's total area. To put that in perspective, the total area of land Disney owns in Florida is 30,000 acres, or about 47 square miles, an area slightly smaller than the town of Scituate. Only about a quarter of that land has been developed though, 7,100 acres, or 11 square miles. And if you were just looking at the 4 theme parks, that's even smaller at only 1,100 acres or 1.7 square miles. This means that all of Disney's developed land in Florida would fit within the Scituate Reservoir watershed. Twice. And the combined area of just the Disney theme parks alone would fit in the reservoir watershed more than 13 times over. That's 13 Magic Kingdoms, 13 Epcots, 13 Hollywood Studios, and 13 Animal Kingdoms, all within the area of the reservoir and its watershed in Scituate. With bucolic Scituate being less connected to the bureaucracy of state government, residents were slow to catch on to what was happening, and a bit nefariously, the Providence Water Supply Board and other supporters of the reservoir project preferred it that way. It would be much easier to take the land if residents had no idea what was coming until it was too late to realistically do anything about it, and that's exactly what happened. It's perhaps somewhat fortuitous that the Water Supply Board, in their effort to painstakingly survey the land and document all existing structures, hired Providence Journal photographer John R. Hess to do the work. Without Hess's contributions, there would be very little evidence left today of what would soon be wiped off the map. And speaking of maps, as you might imagine, town residents became wary of John, this unfamiliar individual spending so much time around town taking photographs. Townspeople were fed various lies about how it was a survey for the creation of new maps, but many were rightfully suspicious. In some images, residents are even seen standing outside their property. Now, it's easy to dismiss this as mere coincidence. People standing in front of their houses, so what? But early photography was a slow process, taking several seconds to minutes for an exposure to be captured. If you've ever wondered why people so rarely smile in old photographs, it's because they were required to stay perfectly still for so long that a straight face was just easier to hold than a smile. Knowing this, it becomes clear that these crisp images of Scituate's defiant citizens were deliberate. Residents literally stared down this existential threat long enough for it to get uncomfortable, lest they be reduced to fleeting blurs that mar an otherwise clean photograph of their home or business. Many of these images have an emotional feel, a personal presence that says, "I'm here and I will not be ignored or brushed aside." As word of the impending reservoir spread, the news was met with a peculiar mix of pride and anger. Reporters tell of encounters with rowdy bar patrons, in one breath boasting about how truly great Scituate was to be selected for such a marvelous and prestigious project, while in the next cursing the wheels of progress that would soon roll over them. By 1920, construction was well underway and there was no stopping the inevitable. Residents and onlookers witnessed the slow sanitization of the land. Trees were cut down and cleared, and all existing structures were torn down or burned, so that rotting wood and debris wouldn't foul the clean water. By the end of construction, Scituate had lost the entire villages of Ashland, Kent, South Scituate, and Richmond, as well as the western half of North Scituate. In total, 1,195 buildings were demolished or burned, including 375 homes, 233 barns, 11 ice houses, 7 schools, 6 churches, 6 mills, 5 entertainment halls and movie houses, 2 fire stations, post offices, taverns, general stores, blacksmith and wheelwright shops, and cider mills. 30 dairy farms were lost, and the Providence and Danielson railroad line connecting Scituate's villages to Providence had to be abandoned. 36 miles of roads also had to be abandoned, which required the construction of 26 miles of new roads around the reservoir. More than 1,500 graves were exhumed by hand and moved to other burial sites. Most were reinterred at the newly created Rockland Cemetery in Clayville, just off the northwestern tip of the reservoir. It's also said that some 700 or so more were missed and still remain buried below 6 feet of earth under 80 feet of water. While Ashland, South Scituate, and Richmond were being cleared, elsewhere, a 3,200-foot-long earthen dam and aqueduct system were being constructed, dwarfing the former village of Kent and towering 100 feet over the banks of the river. Court battles dragged on as residents steadfastly held their ground until they could no longer. Ultimately, all of the residents lost, and the Water Supply Board won. Some residents burned their homes in protest rather than give them up. Ironic, as any standing structures would have soon been torn down or burned anyway to make way for the reservoir. Still others were so distraught they took their own lives, just unable to cope or move on. On November 10, 1925, all construction was finally completed and the reservoir began filling. By September 1926, the reservoir was nearing its 39 billion gallon capacity, and on September 30th, the treatment plant went into operation, supplying water for the very first time. In the years since its construction, the Scituate Reservoir has become invaluable to the residents of Rhode Island. Today, little evidence remains of what once was, and very few people know the whole story, but now you do. And although this bit of history sleeps mostly underwater, there are times during periods of extreme drought when remnants of the old stone property walls and building foundations can still be seen along the reservoir's shores. Through a modern lens, it's easy to see the tremendous loss and hurt experienced by a great many who were caught off guard and left without the means to defend themselves. It almost seems unconscionable, and yet, unsurprisingly, the dam is today named for Joseph Gaynor, a champion for the Reservoir Project and the mayor of Providence at the time of its construction. Just part and parcel of the ideology that helps the wealthy and connected get what they want at the expense of the poor and powerless. There have been efforts in the past to rename the dam the Kent Dam in honor of the village it erased, but those attempts have consistently stalled. To this day, the reservoir and surrounding land is owned, operated, and managed by the Providence Water Supply Board. The department is simultaneously a department of the City of Providence and a regulated utility supplying water directly to Providence and surrounding cities, as well as many other areas of the state through wholesale distribution to other local municipal water departments and boards. Each day, more than 100 million gallons of groundwater are collected into the watershed and drained to the reservoir, enabling it to stay sufficiently full while keeping the Pawtuxet River flowing through periods of significant demand. If you're interested in learning more about the reservoir or Scituate's history, I've included links down in the description to all of the articles and other pieces which comprise the source material used when researching this video. In addition, I highly recommend The Lost Villages of Scituate, a wonderful contribution to the Images of America series by author Raymond Wolfe, who lends painstaking context to some of the images you see in this video and many, many more. I've included a link to the book on Amazon in case you're interested. Lastly, I just want to thank the folks of the Providence Water Supply Board of today, who continue to act as good stewards of the watershed land and provided a wealth of knowledge for this work, either directly or indirectly. In particular, I'd like to thank Richard Bludgett, Environmental Resources Manager at the board, for not only the information he provided through Wolfe's book, but also for graciously allowing me to capture the images and video I needed for this episode, while maybe getting a little too close for comfort to some important infrastructure. But most of all, I want to thank all of you for watching today's video. Please take a second to give the video a thumbs up if you liked it, or a thumbs down if you didn't. And as always, I'm open to suggestions for future videos. And I really want to hear from all of you, so either way, tell me what you think down in the comments. If you haven't subscribed to my channel yet and you've gotten this far, please just take a second to subscribe now. Just hit the red button below, or the watermark in the corner. When you do, make sure you hit the bell icon and you'll get a notification every time I release a new video. When you subscribe, it really, really helps me grow the channel, and I appreciate it more than you know. And to all of my existing subscribers, again, thank you. Don't forget, remembering and retelling Rhode Island history is important because Rhode Island history is our history. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.